everyone. How are you guys? Thank you for being here. I'm excited to see you all. I want to start with a quick show of hands. I want to know where you guys are working from. So I'm going to give you 3 categories. Category 1 is that almost every day you go into a company workspace in person. Couple of people, great. Category 2 is most days you are working remotely, virtually, whatever you want to call it, not in company workspace, likely from your home. Okay, many of you. And then the third, you can probably guess, is a couple days a week you're in person, a couple days a week you're at home or remote. Anyone in that boat? Okay, a lot of you too. So this is really aimed at kind of those second 2 groups, but really, the building a hybrid work team or building an inclusive team could be for in the office too. My goal today is that you have at least one takeaway to bring back to your teams to help make them more inclusive or to others at your organization. I do want to talk briefly, and one other thing. If you don't have a handout, there's a table straight back at the very back where you can grab one. All right, so Orange Grove Consulting, DEI consulting company, what we do is we operationalize inclusion. So kind of what does that mean? We take the operational and organizational processes, like related to talent, mostly related to people, and we look for hidden bias. Because of course, if there was obvious bias, you guys are professionals, you would have removed it already. So we look for hidden bias, take that away, and then we embed equitable practices. We also train leaders and individual contributors on inclusive skill sets so they can exhibit those inclusive behaviors in the workplace. And what I'm going to talk about today came out of work that we did for a client probably a year into the pandemic. They said, you know what, we have these hybrid teams now and they're not really inclusive. Help us build inclusion in at the team level, not necessarily organizational, operational processes related to hiring or to promotion, but at the team level. And what we came up with was a 100+ page workbook, multiple workshops, exercises to guide teams through that. And so we have less than an hour together left. If it feels like I am rushing, I'm skipping steps, it's because I am. You guys are right, because we don't have all week. One thing I want to point out, I want you guys to save questions, if you can, to the end, where we'll have some time to go through it, just because I'm getting through a lot of information, and I want to kind of keep it moving so that I don't get stuck. So I would like, I did it again. There we go. So I want you to get in the headspace of, kind of remote work, hybrid work, and inclusion. So most of us went remote for some period of time back at the start of COVID, right? So kind of put yourself back there. Think about what maybe improved with regards to inclusion for your team. Think about what declined. And I'll give you 2 examples. We use Zoom. And so as an example for a video call, everyone has the same exact size box, right? And you're kind of the same size. It can have a leveling effect on hierarchy. Your CEO is the same exact size as an individual contributor. So that could be a benefit. Also, I've noticed it's much more obvious when someone interrupts you on Zoom. I wonder if anyone else has noticed that. You can't really talk over anybody else. Somebody gets cut off, you can't hear 2 voices, and so I think that's a benefit to at least acknowledging, someone interrupting. A decline would be people who are working remotely don't have informal interactions with their colleagues, right? You're walking to the bathroom and you see Steve and you ask him about his weekend. That could be a decline, right? You don't have that camaraderie. So I want you guys to try and pair up. If you have to do a group of 3, totally fine. But I'm going to give you 5 minutes to share what improved for you guys that you've noticed And it could be even something on your team or individually. It could be from last week you noticed, or it could be from 2 years ago. And then also talk about what maybe declined. And we're going to save that for later on in our hour. So go ahead, I'm going to time us. Start connecting. This is your chance to network. So if you haven't yet switched over to hearing about someone else's benefits and what decline, please switch over about halfway through. All right, so hopefully that got you in the headspace of what's working or what was working, what maybe isn't working, and we're going to reference that in a little bit. So what is this hybrid work model, right? The way Orange Grove defines it, it's a new way of thinking about work. It makes hidden assumptions about how work gets done, the default ways. It makes those overt and agreed upon. And it's really redesigning work for the people who are doing the work, which is good for business, right? You want the people doing the work to be as efficient and productive as possible. This is really an outcome-focused model, right? You're not concerned with someone shows up at 8 o'clock and they've got their butt in their seat until 5 o'clock. This is different than that. It's really outcomes-focused. And this is really defining, and this is why you can do this for your in-person teams too if you want to. It's defining the what, like what is the work we're doing, and agreeing on that as a team. It's looking at the how. How do we communicate? What's our work process, right? How do we do that work? And then the where and the when. And that's where the hybrid part comes in, right? For your team, you want to understand, like, when are we all going to meet together? Where are we meeting? That's where that hybrid part comes in. There's 5 steps as we define it. We're going to spend most of our time on steps 1 through 3, and I will breeze through 4 and 5. This slide deck is somehow accessible to you, I believe, through the app, so you can reference back to it or take pictures. I know that's the thing everybody likes to do. So one thing that is required if you're going to use this model, it has to be done at the team level. Your CEO can't say, we're all going to work this way. I mean, they can, but that's not the idea of the model. And the reason for that is at the team level, your accounting team, I'm assuming, does very different work and that kind of what, how, where, and when than your retail store customer service people. And so if you have the same model for everyone, it's not efficient, it's not really outcomes focused, right? So that's one thing I want to point out. And then one thing that is really important, we are a DEI company. We are today focused on the I, the inclusion at the team level. So we're not talking about who you hire and the equitable practices related to promotion. We're talking about individuals becoming part of a group, inclusion, right? And so who's seen that Dimensions of Diversity wheel? Anybody seen that? I should have put it in my slide deck, so I'm sorry. But it is, kind of these circles in one another. And the outside of the wheel are kind of the traditional diversity demographics that we often talk about and measure and are very, very important for our workplace. But then there's other aspects of diversity, personality, how you grew up, what your work style is, right? And this model is really about asking an individual to show up on a team with all of their beautiful, unique, diverse qualities, and then as a team you collaborate on how you work together to acknowledge those aspects of diversity, like work preferences related to how you process information, when you're at your energy peaks, what your personal boundaries are related to the where and the when. And when you're able to collaborate and create that, that is inclusion. And as a benefit, it's also engagement, which sometimes you can use those words interchangeably. And it also will really help your high performers stay, right? They want to be at a place where they can show up and work their best. All right, so I'm going to talk about the team groundwork. Who gets an email daily about psych safety in their inbox? Oh, I'm the only one? Oh, okay. I swear, it's like, most of you probably know what it is. There's a definition up here, and it's really crucial for inclusion at the team level. Because if I can't show up and say how I feel about something that's different than you, that's not a psychologically safe environment. Commonalities, Emily referenced this. You definitely want to acknowledge individual commonalities, right? So Neil and I, we're both morning people, right? We're at our highest energy point from 9 to 12. That's a commonality that you're going to want to bring out related to this model, right? A difference, right? Inga, let's say, likes to talk through ideas with her colleagues. That's how she processes ideas, is she talks kind of out loud. Versus I'm someone who likes to have an idea, spend alone time thinking about it and processing it, right? From this model's perspective, that's a difference that you want to acknowledge because it affects how you work together as a group. A norm is an agreed upon behavior. These are usually implicit. Sometimes they're explicit. I will go back to video calls as an example here, since we're on them so often, at least I am. So some teams, some organizations, I will get on a call and everyone is muted. No video on. There's no chatting. At the start of the call, the person hosting gets on. It's very formal, right? Other video calls, the second someone gets on, they're unmuted, their video is on, talking about the weather, right? Chatting, having a great time, and you kind of roll into the start of the meeting. It's very casual. One is not wrong, one is not right. It's a norm. But very infrequently do companies, let alone teams, explicitly define that norm. And so I'll reference back to that example in a little bit. So we started to talk about psych safety. Oops. And does anyone have a psychological safety agreement with their team in place already? This is a great okay, good. This is a great area for you to think about because when you work with your team, you collaborate and you facilitate a discussion on what do we each need to feel safe in order to express disagreement, other opinions, right? You can put up those guardrails and then you're gonna get the value of diverse opinions. Having diverse opinions doesn't matter if you never hear them, or diverse perspectives and different perspectives. And so that's why this is so important. It can really, at the start of let's say you're having a meeting and you know that there's the potential for some differences to be voiced, put this up. What did we agree on 6 months ago as our psych safety guidelines? This can help people feel like, okay, yep, I'm in a safe space, I'm gonna share. And then you want to define with your team, really talk about what should our norms be? Should we be that team that gets on and talks about the weather before the start of the call? Should we be really formal and nobody wants to unmute? So this is where you will facilitate a discussion with your team members around what the norm should be. And so maybe you have differences of opinion for this, right? And so your agreement may be, your norm is that every Zoom room has the ability to open 10 minutes before the start of a call, right? And the people who are like, oh, I really want that connection, they get on early, they're chatting about the weather, they're having those great conversations, that camaraderie that they don't get maybe because they're not in the office. And the person who's like, no, I want to start at the top of the hour, I'm not interested in that, they join right at the start of the meeting, and then they can skip that, right? So you have that defined norm that kind of acknowledges those differences of preference. Okay, this is one of my most favorite things that I think we're gonna do today. And it is to define a team purpose. This is the essence of what your team does and why. Now, most teams show up at work because they get a paycheck. I mean, I do. I don't work for free. So there's always that why. But why that team? Why that company, right? And what's the value that your team is offering? And this can be something that you put on a signature line. It can be something you shout from the rooftops, right? Like, this is what my team does. I'm really proud of it. You can have it up. As HR people, you can have this up when you're making decisions about policies or procedures. You can think back, does this align with our essence, our why of what we think we're giving back to the organization? So I'm gonna read you an example, and you guys are gonna do this yourselves individually in a minute to start thinking about that. So this is from a team that is customer service for one particular product. So we provide customer service for our product customers. Our work provides the backbone of relationship with our customers. Because of our work, customers stay. They buy more, they like our product more, and we get feedback that makes our product better. Share one more example, close to home. It's Orange Grove's team purpose. We're small, so this is kind of also about the organization as a whole. I also want to point out that you can do this individually, and it helps you kind of talk about your purpose, your why, what you offer to the organization. We actually do this exercise in our Women in Leadership program. We have a unit on promoting your value, and it can be really hard for people. So I am going to give you guys 2 minutes to work on this individually. If someone wants to share with me, or all of us really, not just me, after the 2 minutes, great, but you don't have to. This is something that sometimes requires a lot of kind of thinking, more processing time than 2 minutes. So this is just to get you started thinking about this. And I'm going to give you a caveat. You cannot go back to your team on Monday and say, guess what, I did our team purpose. Promise? You're going to have this format, and you're going to have everyone do it, and then you're going to align on what's similar. Okay, 2 minutes starts now. It's in your handout. About 15 seconds left for those of you still working. But again, you don't have to finish now. All right. Is there anyone brave who wants to share their draft? And no one has to. That's okay. I am giving away things to people who share, by the way. Just sweeten the pot. No? Okay, fair enough. Oh, yes, please, please.
I would share, but I have a leg up because my company's already done a manifesto like this.
Oh, good. Great. Okay.
Ours is that we believe everyone, our clients, our own team, our loved ones, ourselves, deserves the best experience in work and life. Each day we bring this belief to understand our clients' challenges, design innovative, practical solutions to streamline, enhance, and innovate their HR strategies, systems, and processes.
Beautiful. And you've already done this work, really. So.
We spent an hour and a half on that.
Right, exactly. This is not like, that's why you're just getting a taste of it. Okay, so this is for you later. if you'd like it. I have more, so the rest you want to share later. Okay, so next up is doing a journey map. You probably have many processes that you go through. So for you guys, maybe this is something you do for one process that, or project that is ongoing in some way, some process that is repeatable. Or you could do multiple maps. The idea is that, this is really the how. How does our team work? What's the process we go through to get our work done? And this example is a coding team. And you'll notice kind of the third one in is coding segments. And so what maybe this team, as they do this process, realizes, we go off and we do our own coding of this part of the project, and we really need time to really think and process without being interrupted. So maybe they decide, we're not going to have any meetings on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, right? You could meet with, one-on-one when you need to, but no group meetings, so we have this processing time. Or maybe they realize, let's not meet between 10 and 3, right? Every day we could meet, but we want these chunks of time to work. The other thing that may come out of this is that second box, distribute coding assignments. This could be a great way to start thinking about how do we distribute work? How should we distribute work, right? The idea is this model shouldn't be fast and you get it done in 2 hours. This should be something that you really work through as a team, and that's what's going to create inclusion and engagement as a team. All right, so next is scoping the situation. What this really means, this is code for where and when. And we're going to do some definitions. This assumption and reframe model comes from Orange Grove's model on unconscious bias, because a bias is an assumption, and which may or may not be fact, and a reframe is a new way of thinking about what you originally thought that assumption. You're going to reframe it. So for this model, an assumption is something perceived as fact, but maybe it's not. If it's left unchallenged, assumptions may limit options unnecessarily. A reframe is an alternative way to look at something. When it's used with an assumption, it can open up possibilities and alternative solutions. And a boundary is a working constraint or a limitation that may be negotiable or not, right? For the purpose of this model, that is the definition. So we're going to go through an exercise that you're going to ask your team to go through, every individual. This is not something you can go up and say, I'm going to establish your boundaries for you, right? How well does that work out most of the time? Of course, you're an employer, and of course there are some boundaries, but still, the idea of this is inclusion, not telling someone what to do. So the first step is to identify a constraint. So I have a 10-year-old, he's in elementary school. So this could be my constraint, which actually really is most of the time. That between 3 and 3:30, he's coming home on the bus. I need to be there to get him home, into the house, feed him a snack, right? So I also, no team meetings between 3 and 3:30. That's my constraint. So is there an assumption behind that? So an assumption may be it's only me. Right? I'm the only one who can greet my kid at 3 o'clock and give them a snack. And so if I test that assumption, I may find a reframe. That if I have enough notice, occasionally, I can get backup, right? There's other people who can come in and help with my kid, including my husband, but that's another story. I'll give you 2 more examples. The first one is related to COVID, all right? So let's say the constraint is I'm immunocompromised. I can't meet in person with my team because it's not safe for me. The assumption there is that there's no way to meet in person safely. The reframe, there's a couple of them. One would be, I can ask my team members to wear KN95 masks and sit in a well-ventilated room for us to occasionally meet in person for the times that it's really important to. The other reframe could be, If it's not July or August, maybe we can meet outside. It's well ventilated, maybe my colleagues are open to that, right? So it's really kind of thinking outside of what you thought was your constraint. One more example, and it's kind of the opposite of these. A lot of people, especially in HR, feel like they have to be available all the time, right? Something urgent, they need me. If I get a meeting on my calendar, I'm going to accept it. So the constraint may be, I need to be available all the time because I'm in HR. The assumption is that I don't matter enough to schedule time for myself so I don't get burned out. I don't matter enough for a lunch hour or to stop my day at a certain period. And so the reframe is, I'm going to set aside time on my calendar so that I can eat lunch and stay healthy and be available to my team, right? So the first two examples are pushing past maybe what could have been a constraint, and the third one is setting a constraint because you don't have enough. So I'm going to give you guys 1 minute to think of a constraint, test it with the assumption, and potentially reframe. Bonus points if you can do more than one. And then I'll tell you when you should start sharing, when that minute is over, 3 minutes in group. If someone asks you to help test an assumption, or if there is an assumption, great, but it's not something that in general with your team you should volunteer. Like, really, you should be available, right? We don't want to do that. So you've got a minute. Start thinking, please. And if you have no constraints, maybe you're the person in the third example. You need some. All right, so I'm going to start the timer for the sharing. I'm very regimented with my timing, aren't I? Got 3 minutes. So we're about halfway through sharing time if you want to switch. All right. So, hopefully that was helpful. Who is brave and would like to share? Great, look at that right away. Okay.
My constraint is I'm invited to way too many meetings that I can't really bring much value to.
Okay, so his constraint is you're invited to way too many meetings that you can't possibly attend.
Well, no, that I don't bring value.
Oh, that you don't bring value to. Got it, okay.
The assumption is HR has to be part of every meeting to be a watchdog.
Assumption is HR has to be part of every meeting to be a watchdog. Don't you love those jokes?
With management, your role in the company, and has to only be invited if they clearly feel we will bring value to that conversation.
Okay, did you guys hear that? Because I'm not really good at repeating. Thank you. Okay, excellent. And I have a book for you. I do not have a car. This is not an Oprah moment. All right, so best practices around hybrid. We already did this, right? At that beginning sharing exercise, you're going to do that same thing with your team, right? People are going to think on what was really working for them, maybe what wasn't, and then they're going to share and they're going to come up with best practices, either individually and as a team, right? And then we're going to do kind of the fun part of taking everything you've done to date. So this is bringing those boundaries individually. It's taking the best practices. You're going to reference back to commonalities. Who's a morning person, right? To the differences related to processing time and the way people think. And this is mostly around where and when. It could be how. But I'll give you an example of how you could, kind of something you could negotiate. Let's say some of you work with people in different time zones, particularly on the other side of the world, okay? And you're always trying to accommodate so that your person in Asia is not up in the middle of the night. Well, as part of this process, you may know where I'm going, you may realize that person in Asia is a night owl. Well, guess what? You've been bending over backwards to try to make sure they are meeting during normal work hours, but that's not what works best for them. They'd love to put their family to bed, and then they're up anyway, so they may as well be meeting with you at 11 o'clock at night, and it's a normal time for you, right? That's how, knowing those differences and those preferences, that person now all of a sudden feels completely included and they're at their best, right? So that's why this step can be fun, to figure those things out. And maybe someone doesn't get exactly the schedule they want, but at least they were heard, their voice was heard, and the team worked through it collaboratively. And if it's not collaborative, then reference back to your psych safety, right? All right, so now we're going to move to step 3, building the contract. And so the idea of a team contract comes from decades of research, long before COVID. A team contract is just laying out the ways in which your team works together. So what we're going to cover today are things like your decision-making process, how you communicate, right? That's part of kind of the team contract. What resources you have. When you do meet, how will those meetings be structured? So let's talk about a decision tree. There's 2 kinds of decisions usually. Fast, urgent, the house is on fire, and slow, right? We have to prepare for something in a month. How do we make this decision? And a lot of this, you think, oh, well, the leader makes the decision, right? Well, hopefully the leader's getting input from the team and there's a process for that, and it's helpful to document this. This seems very theoretical, so I'm going to give you an example that is close to my heart because it's something that goes on in my house almost daily, and it is what's for dinner, right? This is very challenging. So there's a different process between, it's Friday night and it's 5 o'clock, everybody's hangry, right? You don't have a plan, versus the process for I'm placing an Amazon Fresh order, which I love, tomorrow, and I'm going to menu plan what everybody's going to eat for the coming week. So that's and I probably, as the kind of person who's in charge of food in my house, I'm the one who's going to make the ultimate decision, but I want input from my family, right? So that's the same way you can think of it in your team. Hopefully that example resonates. I don't know if anyone else struggles with that. So communication. This is something that is so commonly implicit, you don't even think about it. So let's do some vocabulary. Push communication. That's where I'm sending you an email. Really, an email is a push communication. It's one way. I'm telling you something that I think you need to hear. Versus a pull communication, you leave something in a place where someone can access it if they need it and if they want to. Overall, I think we use way too many push communications. A discussion, we know what that is. Channel is what medium you're using for that communication. Asynchronous is separately, synchronous is simultaneously. And the reason you want to do this as a team, and this is, you guys have a copy of this in your handout. Your handout, I condensed some of the columns because it was too wide for the page. But the reason you want to do this is so that there's an understanding. How are we going to communicate things internally with us as a team, right? What are kind of the rules? What's our agreement on this? I want you to pay special attention when you do this with your team to the how, the channel. Don't have it be all email. That's my advice. And the secondary, who else needs to be included? So how many people are CC'd on too many emails? Okay, so this is where you get to have the rules, right? You get to discuss, when do we CC each other? When don't we? What's the process for deciding that? That could save your inbox. Maybe you could get through, your emails if you weren't CC'd on things that weren't really relevant to you. I also want to comment on push versus pull. There is the tendency for those of us that maybe work for organizations who are at the headquarters, the home office, for the local offices to feel bombarded and barraged with information, right? And that's because it's push. So I worked with a client years ago who made a huge effort to try to create more animosity between the home office and the local offices. And they were like, we're not pushing information that we think is urgent unless it really meets these criteria. Otherwise, we're leaving everything in this place where it can be pulled down. And that helped in their relationship between the home office and some of the local offices, where it's not like constantly being told things that maybe the local office thinks they don't need to know, right? So I would encourage you to use this chart and go back to your team and work on this. If nothing else, to reduce your CCs. So considerations, you guys have this in the deck, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But there's some things that you'll be like, oh yeah, I know that. Other things like non-native speakers, right? Think about that if you have people on your team. And as HR people, maybe other people in the organization. Some of this applies to all sorts of communications, right? And if you have the problem like many people do, that employees aren't reading emails, maybe do some different forms, a different channel. Send a video, right? Try some different things. This is your chance to experiment. All right, so when we think about communication, there's sometimes the tendency to be like, oh, well, let's just have a meeting. But that might not be the most efficient way to do things. And this is just a way to think about, when should we have a meeting? Related to, do we really need to collaborate? How interdependent is this? And as much as you can, try to separate the cooperation, coordination, and collaboration, right? Maybe that meeting you regularly have can be a lot shorter because you can get things done asynchronously, and then for the final step, you come together. And social presence, right? Orange Grove, we do so much virtually. Long before the pandemic, we were doing virtual training. It's really good. I'm a little biased. But there's one thing that is very hard for us to do virtually, and that's strategy work. And so we just have to prioritize with our clients, if we're going to do strategy and we're going to do a good job, we're doing it in person. And that's maybe what you end up doing, where what is the social presence? How do we really need to engage with one another? And if you're meeting less in person, maybe then you have more resources, right? Sweeten the pot. Who doesn't want a catered lunch or to go off-site somewhere? So think about your budget and the way that you're saving and how you can position that. We're saving on all this office space, but we are going to, commit to more resources related to these in-person meetings. So speaking of meetings, this is where I'm going to skip to the next best practices. When you do meet, work with your team to figure out what is our goal for this meeting, and then work your way backwards along a matrix of how long should we meet, who should run this meeting, what should the prep work be, right? Don't just default to a meeting. If that's one of the takeaways, that's great, because don't default to meeting for everything. All right, and then the next part of a team agreement are resources. So as part of this whole exercise, especially related to the how we do our jobs, maybe you determine that there's certain resources you need that you don't have. I would say, number one, you may actually have access to resources that you're not utilizing, right? So if you identify what you're looking for, first start internally. Do you already have, is there someone else in the company using a project management software and you can just get in on it so that you can also have some users on it? And if there is something that's missing, then this is your opportunity to try and go get it. Part of resources are allyship skills. And some of you are like, finally, she's going to talk about DEI. But hopefully, I was talking about it related to inclusion. This is our research, our original research at Orange Grove. And they're just, if you're not teaching it and it's not well developed, it's probably not being exhibited on your team. So you could go find some training. I could help with that. You may have access to training already, right? Some asynchronous learning that you could give your team. But if you want to work on this in addition to that or instead of that, these are our recommendations. So I mentioned the interrupting on Zoom, right? How it's obvious. Ask your team to, for a couple of weeks, just take notes on interactions. Observe. Notice who's talking, whose ideas get bubbled up more, who's interrupting, who's not being heard, who's leading meetings, who's getting more, kind of access to leaders, and then empower people to say in a meeting, like if you're discussing viewpoints, before you move on, before we move on, can I hear from Frank, please? I'm really curious what he has to say about this. And then all that observation, you want to ask people to self-regulate. So if they notice they're Frank and they're not speaking up, they need to self-regulate and practice speaking up and letting their voice be heard. If there's someone who they realize, oh my gosh, I do most of the talking in the meeting, right? Maybe they need to sip it and just kind of step back and share the space with other voices. A lot of us are uncomfortable with quiet, right? So this is a way to practice not having sound and being quiet on a call. And then you probably already all do this, but you go round robin. In a meeting, you say, let's hear from everybody what everybody thinks. Very important to ask people to do this at the start of the meeting before the leader has given their opinion. Can you imagine, like, the leader says, well, this is what I think we should do. Does anybody have a differing opinion? That's much harder than, let's hear what everybody thinks about this, right? And then at the end, do the same thing, go around again. And then, of course, the obvious one, check in. Emily talked about this, the how are you, where you really want the answer. How are you feeling on the team? Do you feel like your voice is heard? How can I help you, right? Or maybe just listen. That makes somebody feel included. So this create success measures and feedback is pretty self-explanatory. You want to create a way to get the feedback, right? Feedback loops. What do other departments think about what you're doing? What does your internal department think about this model, what you're trying out? And then talk with the team, like, is this working? And if it's not, try something new, right? I mean, we're also stuck in, well, this is how we do it, but the whole point is to like adapt, which, COVID has taught everybody. And then what's even better is that you really showcase what you're doing, right? That team purpose, showcase it. If you can set a specific goal related to hybrid, do it. You kind of have your own dashboard. It's great for checking how things are going. And then planning for challenges. So you're in HR, you probably do this a lot. Been doing this a lot related to COVID. Think forward. What if your star presenter, or you're presenting to the board and your leader, knows everything, they've got it, right? And the night before they test positive for COVID. If you don't have an understudy, why not, right? Why don't you have someone ready? This is something you could have foreseen as a potential thing happening. And that's what you want to do related to scenario planning. And then you want to, unfortunately, plan for conflict. Some conflict is inevitable if you are creating an environment where people feel like they can share their opinions. Hopefully it's not personal conflict, but in that psych safety agreement, maybe you have a process, maybe you have guidelines for when there's conflict, right? And maybe you want to do a separate kind of team plan for when there's conflict, because diverse teams feel less comfortable, so there may be conflict. And according to Harvard Business Review, not just me, that's why they perform better. So these are the 5 steps. I told you we'd spend a lot on 1 through 3, 4 and 5, I promised. We zipped through. And this is the time when you get to ask me questions that hopefully I can answer. I'd also love to hear takeaways. If anybody had any aha moments, what you, hopefully, at least one thing you're taking away to implement. So thank you so much.